All right, guys, we're going to go ahead and get started. I want to thank everybody who's on the webinar tonight for joining me for the live recording. And then I want to go ahead and thank those who are going to be checking out the webinar at a later time, and date. Thanks for joining in. Hopefully you'll find some really helpful nuggets in tonight's talk, as most of us who are on this are going to be listening to this are going to be getting ready for the upcoming TCS New York City Marathon next Sunday, November 4th. So we've already checked. The chat box is working. That's where you're going to want to type in questions, comments, if you have any during tonight's talk. If you forget to ask something tonight, you guys know where to find me. You can certainly shoot me an email, and I'll get back to you as soon as I can. But one last time, for those of you who are on, if you can see my screen, you should see the title page that says Race Day Ready Webinar. Just go ahead and type yes. All right, so we're going to go ahead and get started with tonight's presentation, and then we will certainly have time at the end to answer any questions that may be out there. And if you have a question or you're considering asking one, I encourage you to ask it tonight, because chances are there's somebody who's going to listen to this at a later time who has the same question, and they're going to be grateful that you asked it and it got answered. All right. So just a few things we're going to talk about tonight, and I'm guessing that the webinar itself, the presentation, won't take that long. So we should have plenty of time at the end for any questions or comments. But we're going to talk about race week. Certainly going to talk about race weekend, race morning, the race, all 26.2 miles, some racing strategy, post-race tips. We're going to have a little inspiration, and then just share some ways to stay connected with Cough Running after next week's race. All right, so diving right into race week. A lot of this is going to seem pretty straightforward and simple and common sensical, but it all bears repeating, I think. So the most important thing you can do as you approach race day really is to keep things as simple and familiar as possible. Nothing new. So what does that exactly mean? It means that we're going to be eating the same foods you've eaten throughout training. We're going to be working out and running at the same times we've been doing those things throughout training. Obviously, the aim is going to be to get plenty of sleep, especially Monday through Friday of next week, as you may find next Saturday night challenging to get consistent quality sleep. An obvious thing is we're not going to be busting out a new pair of running shoes. You should already have your race day shoes in hand, purchased with a few miles on them already. Certainly now is not the time to try a new gel or electrolyte drink. And then obviously stick to your training plan. All pretty common sense things there. More on race week. If you have small children, have you solidified your childcare plans? I recommend being packed and ready to go for the race by next Wednesday or Thursday. This is just going to give you enough time to make any last minute changes, allow you to absorb any sort of last minute changes that come up. And it's going to also give you peace of mind heading into the race. So when packing, what we're going to want is we're going to want to dress for race day as if the air temperature is 10 to 15 degrees warmer. Because obviously as we run, our core body temperature heats up, and we want to account for that. And you also want to account for the fact that once you get to start village for the race, you're going to have a little bit of a wait. So you're going to want to bring some warmer clothes that you don't mind shedding at the start of the race. If you're running with your own nutrition and hydration, have everything ordered and in hand by midweek next week. Again, giving yourself enough time to pivot if you need to. If you listen to music while you run, is your playlist finalized? Seems, kind of funny to bring that up, which is just one last thing, that one more thing you can get checked off the list early. Whether you're driving or flying, make sure all is well now with your vehicle and your flight details. Obviously, confirm your hotel reservation now, not waiting until next week. And then really, race hydration starts no later than Thursday of next week. Now, race weekend, the fun begins. It certainly does. Arrival, obviously have a plan for when and how you're going to be arriving in New York. Have a plan for where you plan to eat. And again, nothing new until race after the race. If you are a charity athlete whose charity has a team race weekend event that you're planning on attending, don't necessarily rely solely on the food that's being provided at your team event. I'm a creature of habit and I like to control as much as I possibly can. So bringing your own food and making sure your hotel has a fridge and microwave where you can kind of manage what you're putting into your body is always ideal. Not always possible, but certainly ideal. The Race Expo and Packet Pickup is at the Javits Convention Center, halls 3B and 3E. Next Thursday and Friday, packet pickup times are between 10 a.m. to 8 p.m. And then next Saturday, 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. and all times are Eastern. You are the only one who's going to be able to pick up your race packet and bib and participant shirts. Nobody else is going to be able to get that for you. So if you've been planning on having somebody pick that up for you, need to change your plans. Know how you're getting to and from the expo. More than likely, public transportation is certainly going to be the way to go there. There'll be a lot of vendors sampling at the expo, whether it be gels or new bars. Now again is not the time to try those. Grab anything that's non-perishable that you might want to try after the race, but certainly nothing new until afterwards. If know the course. Now it's really not feasible to drive the New York City Marathon course beforehand. That can be challenging, obviously, in big cities. But there are course videos out there. You can find one on the New York City Marathon website. You can find those course videos on YouTube. I encourage you to check that out and just kind of see what you, if you haven't ran the race before, see what you've gotten yourself into. Now, race morning is truly time to change your life. You are going to be participating. I think I mentioned it here later. You're going to be participating in the largest marathon in the world. 55,000 people apply and register for the race, and there will be more than likely 50,000 finishers, which is just absolutely bonkers to think about. But have multiple means of waking up in addition to the alarm on your phone. So wake up call, family, friends calling you, texting you, anything that you can to get out of bed on time. I don't mention here, but it's worth noting, certainly next Sunday is daylight savings time. So there's going to be a time change. Obviously, most phones kind of automatically switch to the new time, but it makes it even more necessary to have multiple means of getting up. Obviously, knowing how you're going to get from where you're staying at the start village. When you registered for the New York City Marathon, you were given the opportunity to select a transportation option. You should know that by now. You should be able to go into your My New York Roadrunner account and see what you are signed up for. There are 3 options. Now, yes, you can take public transportation like a cab or an Uber or Lyft, but to get to Start Village in Staten Island, but the New York City Marathon certainly recommends and prefers that people use one of the 3 transportation options. I have had a few people ask me that they were forced to sign up for a particular transportation option that they didn't really want. Like, for example, they're staying in Manhattan, just blocks away from the public library, and so the Midtown bus would have been ideal, but that was the first to sell out, if you will, and they were forced to take the bus out of New Jersey. I've heard on multiple occasions where people have been able to go to the information desk at the expo and get that switched. It's not a guarantee, but that's something that if you're kind of stressing about that, then I recommend you go into the information help desk at the expo and seeing if you can get that switched. Bring race morning throwaway clothes. We talked about this before. For most of you, you're going to have quite a wait at the start village. This is a unique start setup for the New York City Marathon. You can always count on brisker temperatures, and so having some throwaway clothes that you don't mind donating. So a sweatshirt, a hat, or a long sleeve shirt, and some pants that you can wear, or even I've seen people with blankets and sleeping bags that they are planning on just donating. Anything you can do to stay warm at this in the start village is key. But then, of course, once you are in your corral, it's time to start focusing on the race and visualizing, how you're going to execute your race plan. And I think this is key. There's a lot of nervous energy in the start village. There's a lot of nervous energy when you get into the corrals, and people, in my opinion, waste a lot of energy while waiting for the starting gun to go off, so to speak. I would encourage and share this with a lot of our Chicago marathoners a few weeks back. Once you're in your start village, do some deep breathing, close your eyes, visualize yourself clicking off the miles, and visualize what it's going to feel like when you cross the finish line. Think about all that. Think about your training, how far you've come, and then get ready to execute on that race plan. Now, the race itself. I always recommend start slow. Start slow and take the first few miles to settle into a strong, steady, but realistic pace. This is probably the most important advice I can share with you. Just the sheer number of people, even with the multiple wave starts, there's just thousands of people you're going to be starting with. So really, it's hard. It's really kind of challenging to even go out too fast anyways, with just the way things are set up at New York. But I would encourage you, because the adrenaline is going to be flowing and you're going to be excited, understandably so, and you should be, but really resist that urge to go out too fast. Because what I've found over the years, and with athletes and myself personally, that when you kind of blow through that energy at the beginning of the race, that first 5 to 10K, you really don't have it a lot of times the last 10 to 5K of the race. So, and that's when you're obviously going to really need it. So start slow and steady, and stick within a realistic pace. As I mentioned, the New York City Marathon is the largest marathon in the world, so it's obviously going to be crowded. Resist, that urge to weave in and out of runners. Side to side or lateral movement on a course is really just wasted movement. And you will technically be running or further than 26.2 miles. So try to stay in a straight line as much as you can. This expert tip, I think it's worth noting, each hydration station or aid station is a couple city blocks long. So you'll see that when you can spot the signs for, like, when a water Gatorade station is coming up. You'll see hundreds of people like just making a beeline for the first table. Bypass the first couple tables, and get to the latter tables. They tend to be less crowded. There's plenty of volunteers to help you, and you will sidestep any potential collisions, which I've seen people falling down, and just it can get crazy at the aid station. So just try to bypass those first couple tables at each station. It's important, and I think it's worth noting, it's important to stay positive, guys, and embrace the fact that there's going to be peaks and valleys along the way. I encourage you to think back over the last 4 to 5 months when you started training. Think about the good times, think about the bad times, what you did to overcome whatever adversity you face. And everybody that's either on right now or who's going to be listening certainly faced a particular level of adversity. I know that's a pretty common theme in most people's marathon training journeys. So, how did you get past that? And think about, how you're going to get past any sort of challenges that pop up while running next Sunday. I'm a big fan of mantras. If you've read the weekly tips that go out, we've mentioned this, but using a simple mantra like "finish strong" or "I got this" or just 1 mile, whenever that doubt creeps in, is huge. And I alluded to this, but remember, you didn't just show up for this. That start line next Sunday, you earned that. So trust in your training and take things 1 mile at a time, because that's really all you can do. Run the mile that you're in, and eventually, whether it's in 2.5 hours or 6.5 hours or anything in between or even above or below, you're going to get to the finish line. So now we're going to just talk about a few race day racing strategy tips. And we're going to go ahead and cover the first bullet, run the tangents. We're going to cover that last because I'm going to talk a little bit more about that. But these other ones we'll jump into. The first being pass with authority. And really what I mean by that is that's a mental tactic / tip that I like to use. It just feels good no matter how fast or slow. It's all relative, right? You're going. It just feels good to pass people. And so I try to, when I know I'm going to pass somebody, give myself enough clearance, which goes into my next bullet point and passing wide, so that I know I'm not going to hit the person or people. But I like to surge past that person or group of people. And then once I get past them and I'm clear of them by a ways, then settle back into my regular, steady race pace. So pass with authority because it feels good. Surge on the corners. This kind of goes with the tangents, guys, but you'll notice that when there's twists and turns in the course, the mass of humanity, they all tend to slow down. And yes, in the first several miles, when you're just kind of packed in there like sardines, it's really kind of difficult to surge on the corners. But certainly as things open up, the further along and deeper you get into the race, I encourage you to instead of slowly going into the corners and just kind of going with the rest of the crowd, surge into the corners for that extra boost of confidence as you pass more people on the corners, and then settle back into that steady race pace. And then again, same thing with hills, with corners. For those of you who have ran races with hills, and certainly there's inclines throughout the New York City Marathon course, you'll see people just naturally slow down, right? But focus on just surging or at least running strong to the top and the bottom of each hill. I like that because it gives me a little extra confidence as a hill or a rather steep incline approaches. And then we're going to talk about just running the tangents, and I included a diagram there. Essentially, what you want to avoid doing with when you're racing is just going kind of like doing the picture on the left where you're going along with the twists and turns in the course. The tangent, or running the tangent, is going to allow you to run the shortest distance through the race route, which is how the course is measured. Actually, not running the tangents, you will end up running further than 26.2 miles, and I feel pretty secure in saying nobody really wants to do that. And actually running the tangents can shave several seconds from your time. Really the key, guys, is to look up and be aware of what's ahead. So again, checking out that course video, knowing where the twists and turns are going to be in the course, but at the very least, looking up and knowing when you're going to be turning to the left or you're going to be turning to the right. So again, on curving roads, not snaking your way along like on the left. Instead, we want to run a straight line from inside corner to inside corner using the entire running route. So a little bit of awareness with the course as you race can be very beneficial to your final finishing time. So post-race, we're going to talk a little bit about, it's obviously, yes, without a doubt, going to be time to celebrate. Upon crossing the finish line, I always like having a volunteer place the finisher's medal around my neck instead of them just simply handing it to you. The volunteers at the New York City Marathon, especially at the finish line, they are amazing, and they're so supportive and complimentary, and so chances are they'll put it around your neck too. But I just think it's a nice little little finishing touch to your experience. Obviously, the overwhelming urge is going to be to sit down and stop moving. This is really one of the worst things that you can do. And plus, there's going to be volunteers there moving you along as because there'll be hundreds and thousands of people finishing at any given time. So they want to keep the finisher chute clear. So you want to keep moving. Have a plan in place for when you're going to reunite with family and friends after the race. An expert tip is, and if they haven't already, encourage your supporters, whether they're going to be on site, on course, or wherever else in the world, encourage them to download the race app, and then they can track your progress throughout to see when you finish. I recommend trying to eat a full meal if it's possible. It's not always possible, but within 2 hours of finishing the race. And then, have a plan also for, when you exit the finisher chute, the finisher's area, how are you going to get from that point to where you're staying? I would also encourage you to try out a 15 to 20 minute ice bath later that night, or at least before you go to bed, to start helping with some of that inflammation. Continuing to move throughout the day, guys, is going to help with that inflammation. It's only when you become sedentary, you don't want to move because you're sore, it's just going to get worse. The inflammation is going to get worse, and it's going to become a bigger problem. So keep moving. Some light stretching is key as well. If you're planning on getting a massage, I encourage you to wait until Tuesday, anywhere between Tuesday and Thursday the following week after the race, just to account for any delayed onset muscle soreness. Because what you'll probably find is that you don't feel that bad on Monday. It's Tuesday, Wednesday into Thursday of the following week when that soreness really sets in, that you feel pretty beat up. And then, of course, after it's all said and done and you're back home, it's time to take inventory of what went well and what you can improve on, both in the race and in training as well. And then finishing up here before the question session is a little bit of inspiration. In the weekly tips we send out, there's always a section at the bottom of those tips with a quote or something that I find inspirational, and you've probably seen some of these before, but they bear repeating. And I'll point out a few of these. I'm not going to read all of them, but the first one is, we don't rise to the level of our expectations. We fall to the level of our training. And I shared this quote at the beginning of the summer when we did the kickoff webinar. So hopefully you check that out. But you're getting to this start line. Hopefully you put in all the work. You know whether or not you put in the work. And so hopefully you haven't left anything to chance. But that no matter what, when you get to that start line, you may hope that you're going to run a 3.5 hour marathon. But if your training hasn't been such that you realistically can expect to run the 3:30 marathon, then ultimately your performance is going to fall to that level of training. Whether you think you can or can't, you're probably right. That's a great one from Henry Ford. And then to give anything less than your best is to sacrifice the gift, from the Steve Prefontaine, a famous distance runner in the 1970s. Ultimately, it's going to be a challenge getting across that finish line. No matter if you've ran 50 marathons or this is your first, covering 26.2 miles is just inherently a challenging feat. So just do your best, and that seems pretty common, like common sense, but just do your best and just trust in your training. And then I love sharing this photo. Hopefully you've checked this out, but there's going to probably be some times next Sunday when you're in it. Maybe it's at mile 2, maybe it's at mile 10, maybe it's at mile 16, 20. But at some point, my point that I'm making is there's going to be some times where you doubt yourself and you question whether or not you can finish, or you're going to have an excuse as to why you can't finish, or you're going to have an excuse as to why you're not performing up to your expectations. But just remember, that excuse is invalid. No matter what that excuse is, squash that with whether it's a positive mantra or just staying present in the moment, staying in the mile that you're running, and not letting things get too ahead of yourself or too big. And just remember, it is just an excuse. Physically, your body's going to be telling you stop because it's going to end the pain. or it's going to end the discomfort. But just mentally, you're so much stronger than that, and just know that you can you can go out there and achieve that finish line. And then when all else fails, whether you're shuffling, sidestepping, walking backwards, walking, run walking, or running, just keep moving forward 1 mile at a time. And then here are some ways to stay connected, guys. But I think I'll be sending out a post-race survey the week after the race, and of course, we've got next week before the race. So if you have any questions, comments, concerns, you know where to find me. But I'm going to go ahead and now open this up for any questions or comments or discussion, and then we'll get you out of here at a pretty decent time. So we already have some questions, and these are good questions. So Rasha, what do you mean by surge? Yes. So we talked about surging into the corners of the turns. We talked about surging up an incline. Essentially, yes, you answered your own question. That is, just go faster if you can, if it's physically possible, even if it's just slightly. It can also just really honestly be based off of effort. So you're running and it feels comfortable. Here comes a turn. You run a little bit harder into that turn. It feels slightly less comfortable. And then once you get past a turn and you're into a straightaway, you kind of settle back into that steady pace. How long should we wait after the marathon to resume workouts? This is a really good question. Certainly, there's going to be a rest period right after the marathon, and depending on who you talk to, they'll tell you to completely rest for a full, up to 26 days, or the number of miles that you run in the race. I am not of this philosophy or coaching philosophy. I would recommend that you're done with the race on Sunday, taking a good 2 to 3 days of full, just true rest. Yes, you're going to be going about your everyday life, and you want to move and stay active. You don't want to just lay on the couch. But before you really get back into workouts or running, I would maybe do like a light time-based run, maybe 20 to 30 minutes, super easy, super easy, towards the end, like Thursday, Friday of the week following the race, and then kind of staying with the running maybe 2 to 3 days a week after, for the first probably 3 weeks after the race. And that would all be time based. Again, 20 to 30 minutes, just getting the blood flowing, nothing super serious, nothing with any sort of expectations, just with the thought of, hey, I'm doing recovery. Maybe and with that running 2 to 3 days a week, we are getting to the gym, or we don't even have to get to the gym, but we're doing some stretching, we're doing foam rolling, maybe we're doing some light work on the bike. If we're into yoga or something like that, we're doing some just like easy yin type yoga, nothing too strenuous, where we're in a 95-degree yoga studio and doing super aggressive like vinyasa type yoga, but basically just staying active. And then, but truly like getting back into marathon or like heavy race specific type training. With a November race, I would honestly recommend, because I think, the winter, the end of the year, beginning of the year is a great time to really focus on things other than just running. I think it's a great time to address any sort of physical issues or injuries that you may have had. So it's a time to get super strong. And I don't mean like throwing around lots of weight at the gym, but getting super strong in a running specific way, and addressing any sort of things that maybe held you back in your training in your race, but with an eye on getting back into more volume in mid to late January into early February, then when I would recommend, hey, yeah, now it's time to kind of, what race are you picking in the spring, early summer, and let's start training for that. So hopefully that helps. But again, to each his own. Let's see. And Chris has a question. I pulled a muscle in my quad groin my last long run before tapering. I'm a first time marathoner. I can now do 6 miles opposed to 0 over the last 10 days. I'm nervous about the miles not being run and whether I'll recover in time for the marathon. The worse, the confidence I built up over 18 weeks is greatly diminished. Any advice? Chris, I think that you're coming from that's a very natural, normal way of looking at things. Is it ideal? No. And I think, Chris, we've communicated offline about this. That's a tough injury, right? Quad groin. There's so much going on in that core hip girdle region that makes running at times almost unbearable. So I've been there, so I empathize with you on that. My recommendation, whether you have this injury or not, with it being your first marathon, really is going into race day with 0 expectations as to what time you want to run. Because ultimately, with it being your first marathon, you have no idea truly what you're getting yourself into when you're in the race. You could actually respond favorably, quite favorably well, just based off of adrenaline and just the spectacle that is the New York City Marathon. It's much different than knocking out training runs by yourself or with a small group. I would also say don't discount the 18 weeks of training that went really, really well and you were hitting most, if not all, of your runs and you weren't injured. So, you've built a tremendous base up over that time that can't be discounted. Have you maybe lost a little bit of fitness because of your recent injury? It's likely, but you have a week before the race. There's really nothing that we can do, guys, between now and next Sunday to improve our fitness. But there's a whole heck of a lot that we can do to derail our training. We could get even further injured. So I would just focus on what you have ahead of you this next week. Focus on getting in as many quality runs as what your program calls for between now and then. And just focus on, when you're in the race, just focus on staying in the mile that you're in. And just knowing that it's not going to be perfect. It's not going to be perfect for any one of us. And we're going to go into the race. And Chris, I'm not talking to you specifically when I say this next thing, but I think it's for anybody going into any race. We're going into this race with no ego. We're going into this race with the expectation that we're just going to give our very best effort, whatever that effort is, on Sunday, November 4th. Rasha asks, is it easy to navigate your corral once we are in Start Village? Yes, it's super easy. Start Village was something, and the transportation was something, when I did the New York City Marathon a couple years ago, that I was really anxious about and nervous. Me being from the Chicago area and the Chicago Marathon being my hometown race, and that being so easy to park close to the starting line and get in and get out. The whole element of having to select a transportation option and then getting to Start Village and having a couple hour wait, I was just really kind of freaked out about it. Let me ease your concerns that once you're in the Start Village, it's a totally relaxing, positive vibe. There's so much signage that they over communicate where you need to be. There's a lot of volunteers that are willing and able to help you once you're in there. So if you're unsure about anything once you're in the Start Village, find somebody and ask a question, and they're really great about helping you. But definitely something right now, if that's something that you're anxious about, just take my advice and don't be anxious about it, because it's so easy, as you can imagine. Biggest marathon in the world, one of the most popular marathons in the world. They have that process, that start village, the corral process down to a T, and it will be a great experience for you. Yeah. So, are there any other questions? Oh, you're welcome, of course. Are there any questions that we have right now? I'll leave it open for a few more minutes for some more questions. So if you're thinking of any more questions, please feel free to type that in. And hopefully, I recognize a lot of the names that are on the webinar tonight. So hopefully I get to see a lot of you next weekend, next Saturday. Um, and I'll share this next Saturday. But if you're not, if I don't see you next weekend, I think, it's worth bringing up. And there's going to be quite a few people listening to this that I won't have the chance to talk to before the race. But um, there's two things that went through my mind when I was with a bunch of Chicago marathoners a couple weekends ago, and I think it's very much true for the New York City Marathon. So um, when you get to the start village and you get in your corral and you're kind of waiting, there's all this energy and excitement, and they're playing Sinatra, New York, and it's just this awesome experience. You know, that's the time I want you to allow yourself to visualize, and I want you to allow yourself to dream big. Dream about what it's going to feel like when you cross that finish line in Central Park. Dream about what it's going to feel like to hold that New York City Marathon finisher's medal in your hand. Think about what it's going to feel like to tell all your family and friends and loved ones and coworkers, what you just did, and it's going to be an experience of a lifetime. So allow yourself to dream about what that's going to feel like. So my first recommendation would be dream big. But then once that starting gun goes off and you're actually running, I want you to stop dreaming big and I want you to start thinking small. And yes, those seem like opposing viewpoints. But what I mean by that is you can only run the mile you're in at that given time. Whether you're at mile 2, it makes no sense if you're at mile 2 to think about what it's going to feel like, or what if you're going to be hurting at mile 24. Um, and I find that people who do that, and they start thinking about, and they get ahead of themselves, they're like, oh my goodness, I have 20 more miles left, or I've got 26.2 miles to go, or I've got 10 miles to go, or I've still got 6 miles of 10K to go. Those are the people that really spend so much energy thinking about things that they can't control, and they uh, end up sabotaging their own efforts, right? So think small. Think about, and if it's not the mile, thinking about the mile you're in, think about getting from one city block to the next, one stop sign or one stoplight from the next. Or maybe you have people stationed along the course that you're looking forward to seeing. Think about getting from where you're at now to then seeing them. So just staying in the moment. So again, before the race, we're allowing ourselves to dream big. But then once we're in the race, we're thinking small. We're taking it 1 mile at a time. Again, that seems so simple and common sense, but people forget about that. So think about the mile you're in, dream big, but then think small once you're in the race. And then, with that said, I just want to say thank you to all of you for allowing me to be a part of your New York City Marathon training journey. I've spoken or at least emailed with a lot of you over the past 4 months, and it's really an honor to be able to help you out if I did at all help you out. So that's something that I am extremely grateful for, and I don't take lightly. And there's a lot of resources out there. So the fact that you're on tonight, you're going to be listening in the future, just means a great deal to me. Um, I will be sending out the playback in next week's training tip. Or if you want to get it from me directly, just shoot me an email. And of course, if you have any questions between now and next Sunday, text me, call me, email me. I'm there for you. But I wish you all the best of luck next Sunday. And I'm just so excited. And I would just ask that once it's all said and done, send me pictures from your race weekend experience and drop me a note. Just a couple sentences letting me know how the race went for you. Did it live up to your expectations? Did you perform as well as you had hoped? If not, why might that be? And I just want to hear from everybody that's out there. So with that said, that concludes tonight's Race Day Ready New York City Marathon webinar. Thank you so much for being on. Thank you for spending a little bit of time with me tonight. And I wish you all the best of luck in next week's 48th annual TCS New York City Marathon. And with that said, good night. And until the next starting line, I'll talk to you soon.